Genshin Impact is boring, but I don't hate the game. In fact, I love the game. I've been playing for almost like 3 years at this point.
Jesus Christ.
But honestly, Genshin feels more like a chore. You know, when you wake up in the morning, you have to do stuff in the house. You have to clean all the shit. Like Genshin feels that way now. It doesn't feel like a game. It doesn't feel like it's a stress reliever or anything. It just feels like a chore. There's a lot of things to do in the game. But I have a lot of points to make, honestly. And firstly, above all else, I would like to praise the game. The game is good. I mean, it looks beautiful. It has good music. I appreciate that, and the world building itself is just stellar. You know, I like it. But with that, I think Hoyoverse kind of screwed up, and this is just my opinion. But when you make a game that is an action RPG, which has a lot of characters, especially in a gacha, I believe you have to pat out a lot of cracks in the gameplay system, you know. So firstly, the progression is not fun, and there are a few layers to it. Okay? So firstly, the world itself, the open world, which I'm pertaining to, is like really bad, honestly. When the game introduced itself, you have a lot of AR shit to go through, the world level increases and stuff. But honestly, when you get to end game, there's not much to do anymore. And the added enemies, the new enemies, the overworld mobs, sometimes feel fun, but it gets old really quick. And now they just pat out the HP of these mobs, and there's not much strategy, if you will, in combating these mobs. They're just sponges, and honestly, I don't mind having sponges on my open world games, but this time it feels like it's not a fun experience, especially when you farm for your characters. You get your characters to a certain point, they kind of just wreck the enemy, or sometimes they wreck the enemy too quick. You don't get to enjoy all the skills of your characters. That's what I would like if you were a sponge enemy. But other enemies, the mechanics of them, they're just more annoying, especially the new bosses they add, the world bosses and the weekly bosses. Like for example, the Wolf Lord or the Wenut kind of thing, they fly around like flying Dutch one, you know, swirling around his penis and stuff. But they don't make for a fun gameplay experience, or rather, they don't make it challenging. That's the thing. It's not challenging, it's annoying. And I don't really like that in my game. Like when you add artificial difficulty, it's not really fun, you know. Especially when the combat of Genshin is really something I like, especially in an action RPG. It's not something I would commend Genshin for having. And honestly, when you farm for these bosses, they only get used in like a small roster of characters. You don't need to farm them every time anymore. And it's usually like, I don't really mind if you add new bosses, just as long as you get to use a lot of it. There's more incentive to farming it, because when you make an open world, you have to have something, for a reason for you to revisit that part of the open world. So I think Genshin doesn't have that. I don't even do all the weekly bosses anymore, even there if there's like a 30 for the first 3. I only do one, which is a Scaramouche boss, but I think I'll stop anytime soon. But other things like the bosses, you don't need to come back to them, like especially when most of the characters are like only there for you to do the boss. Like the Dendro Hypostasis, there's only a few characters who need it, and then after that don't need it anymore. They just use adding the new bosses. They just use it to pat out artificial spanning of time, if you will. Let me explain. When like a new character drops, Genshin like doesn't want you to speedrun. Like that's honestly, one of the problems with Genshin Burst, I can relate because in the first 2 days or first 3 days, the patch drops, everyone completes it very quickly. And I think it's not about the volume of the content that's the problem. It's just that people want to experience the characters as strong as they can be, especially when there's like video one shots and all that shit. But that's not the whole reason. I think the gameplay of these stuff is not well constructed. I'm not a game designer, but as a person who's been playing a lot of games ever since I was young, I can feel that I don't really feel satisfied when I play with the Abysma characters because they just gate you. Like, you have to farm for crystals, you have to farm for boss materials, you have to farm for every shit, and there's like a limited amount of resin, but you can get through it through a paywall, so it doesn't matter. But honestly, it's not a fun experience when you do that, when you pat out the content you have by just artificial stuffing. You know, when you get a hot dog, instead of putting ketchup and mustard, you put foam in it, which doesn't taste good. It doesn't leave a good taste in your mouth. It just feels like you're eating something artificial. So it's not something I'd like. Which leads me to my next point, the events. The events in Genshin, honestly, at this point, is really shitty, man. I can't even fathom why it came to this point. Like, it's not about the end game. I feel like the events that they have, that they put in the game, especially like as I'm recording this, is currently Windbloom on this current patch. It's like the third Windbloom, and it's not good. Like, I think the Osu event is just like, it's kind of fun and it's passable gameplay, and then you have the picture taking stuff, and then you have this stupid dungeon where you run and get balloons. It's not really engaging. It's not fun. You don't get to use the characters you pulled for. It's just like artificial gameplay, which is like, I don't really find fun. The last events that I think would have been fun, I mean, was fun, like Wind Trace, the Infinite Dungeon event in Inazuma. I don't know if you remember that. And like the first event, the Reconciled Stars with Fischl, that was fun. And I feel like Genshin has to do more of those, like try to engage its player base with the action in the action RPG. So I think that would be a more fun event. Like, I don't need difficulty spikes or anything. It just makes sure that the event is just like, there's an incentive to replay it. Not really primo gem incentives, but more of like gratifying to the player. Which leads me to my next point. The story. The story is behind those events. And if you haven't been playing Genshin for a long time, you won't get shit sometimes in the story if you didn't play the event before. Right? Like, some of those events are like important, like the Albedo event, or like Scaramouche, where he gets introduced in the first Reconciled Stars. Like, you won't know who these people are if you didn't play it. Like, I mean, actually, I get why, kinda. Like, it's a mobile game, and Genshin is getting pretty big, especially when they expand the open world. The files are getting pretty big, and I get that they have to take out stuff like that, especially when the events are temporary. But I hope there's like a compendium where you can access the cutscenes, you can watch them, and I think they can only be watched in YouTube, but you have to find all the right words just to access all of that stuff. Or I'm thankful for Genshin lore enthusiasts that post stuff on TikTok or on YouTube where they explain the lore and stuff. That's really helpful for the community, but honestly, the game itself has to put quality of life just for players to access it in the game, and doesn't have to go somewhere else just to experience that kind of stuff. So yeah, honestly, I love Genshin Impact. There are a lot of things good with the game, and honestly, I've spent a lot of money investing my time and effort and money into the game because I love it so much. I love the characters. I love pulling for stuff, but I feel bad for most Genshin creators because they have to put a little spin on things just for Genshin to feel fun. But I think most of the Genshin content creators doesn't even post Genshin anymore since there's not a lot of stuff in the game. And like all of the stuff in the game is just getting padded out by artificial lengtheners. Like you have to access this in 3 days. You can access it right now. Like that's what made me quit Tower of Fantasy because they padded out the level. You can't progress at a certain level. You have to wait for days, and that just feels fucked up to me. It doesn't feel like you want me to play your game. You don't want me to enjoy what's in store for me. You cock block me into experiencing your game, which makes me think that you didn't prepare much for it. And that's what I like about other games, especially games I like God of War or like Persona 5 or some of the other RPG and gacha games, is that like these games have new game plus. Like the AAA stuff, they have new game plus. Have you heard of Elden Ring? Of course, because that game is good. You can replay it a lot of times. And I even remember when I was a kid, I like when Bloodborne was released, and I played the shit out of that game because you can replay it and there's challenge into the game, but when you overcome those challenge, it's much more gratifying. And Genshin doesn't have that. Instead, they put artificial lengtheners in the abyss, like the flying bosses and stuff. You get shields that are hard to break. You have to have a certain element. And also questing doesn't feel inspired. It's just like fetch quest after fetch quest. There's not much things to do. There's not much combat. And I feel like it's been a crutch in the game for a long time. And I don't like when Genshin feels like a chore. It doesn't feel like a game I'd enjoy anymore. Lately, I've been lazy with it. I don't even burn my resin anymore. And I feel like burning resin is an important part of Genshin. But honestly, the artifact grind, it's not gratifying anymore. You can spend months and months of your time trying to farm for a certain artifact and you won't get it. Even with the strongbox and stuff, that's why they added it. And then, I don't know, it just doesn't feel fun for me anymore. So, I hope in the future, like Fontaine is coming up, I hope that Genshin will do more stuff that is really gratifying for the player and really satisfying in the gameplay, because a lot of my friends already quit Genshin and the people I've started Genshin with don't even play anymore. It's because Genshin is more boring and more of a stalemate, and like you have to wait for weeks on end just to get new content that just feels underprepared. And I don't mean to hate on Hoyoverse and stuff. I'm just really passionate about the game. And I would really like to see more stuff out of Genshin, especially when their characters are really nice. And the game looks beautiful. So, yeah, I feel like that's my 2 cents about it. So, hope to see you guys.